As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
A rare instance of an unexpected consequence of a bad policy advancing liberty is the growth in private schools enrollment and homeschooling that occurred as a result of the COVID lockdowns. An October 2023 study by the Brookings Institute found that 79% of American school-age children were enrolled in government schools in the 2021-2022 school year, down from 84% enrolled in government schools in 2019 to 2020. The decline in children attending government schools accelerated because of the lockdowns, and the enrollment in government schools continues to decline. Other researchers have found similar results. For example, the Urban Institute's Thomas D. found that during the pandemic, hundreds of thousands of children left government schools for private schools and homeschooling. In October of last year, the Washington Post reported that since before the COVID lockdowns, there was a 51% increase in homeschooled children. The Post labeled homeschooling America's fastest growing form of education. The lockdowns served no public health purpose. In fact, the social isolation imposed on children by the closures of schools and even playgrounds did more damage to children than COVID ever could. However, the lockdowns did have a long-run benefit by increasing the number of parents rejecting government schooling. The school closures allowed many parents to see for themselves the problems with government-controlled education. Parents were horrified to witness their children logging on to Zoom and then being force-fed woke propaganda instead of receiving a quality education. Parents realized they had a choice: either allow their children to continue to receive an inferior education or seek out an alternative that would provide their children a quality, woke-free education. Many parents were inspired to seek alternatives to government schools when teacher union officials used their political clout to keep government schools closed even after most business and government offices were open. It turns out that actions by Dr. Anthony, I represent science, Fauci, teacher union officials, and authoritarian politicians who worked to keep government schools closed ended up advancing the popularity of alternatives to government schools. Parents looking to provide their children with a quality home-based education that promotes real learning, that does not push a political agenda, but does instruct the history and philosophy of liberty, should look into my homeschooling curriculum. My curriculum provides students with a well-rounded education that includes rigorous courses in history, mathematics, and the physical and natural sciences. The curriculum also provides instruction in personal finance. Students can develop superior communication skills via intensive writing and public speaking courses. Another feature of my curriculum is that it provides students the opportunity to create and run their own businesses. The government and history sections of the curriculum emphasize free market economics, libertarian political history, and the history of liberty. However, unlike government schools, my curriculum never sacrifices quality education to promote a political agenda. Interactive forums allow students to engage with and learn from each other and give them an opportunity to interact with their peers outside of a formal setting. I encourage all parents looking at alternatives to government schools, alternatives that provide children with a well-rounded education that introduces them to the history and ideas of liberty without sacrificing education for indoctrination, to go to ronpaulscurriculum.com for more information about my homeschooling program. Thanks for listening.
So at least 6 members of the U.S.-backed Kurdish-led SDF, that's the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish force that the U.S. backs in eastern Syria, and at least 6 of their members were killed in a drone attack that hit a U.S. base in eastern Syria late Sunday night, and as the whole situation in the region continues to escalate. The drone targeted a base at the U.S.-occupied Al Omar oil field in eastern Syria's Deir ez-Zor province. So this is one of the oil fields that the U.S. occupies. There are several, I believe, U.S. bases actually at oil and gas fields in eastern Syria. Part of the occupation of Syria is to control the country's natural resources. It's an economic war. The U.S. has a very harsh sanctions on Syria, in the government-controlled areas of Syria, and this is all part of that. So the SDF said in a statement, quote, 6 of our fighters were martyred during a terrorist attack by a suicide plane, end quote. And it was a drone, which they called a suicide plane. So then you had the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is based in the UK. They cited sources who said the death toll had risen to 7 and that 18 other Kurdish fighters were wounded in the attack, but those numbers are not confirmed. I haven't seen any statements actually from the SDF saying that 7 of their fighters were killed. But this is the most significant attack on a U.S. base since Biden ordered that series of airstrikes in eastern Syria and western Iraq on Friday, which killed around 40 people. The Pentagon has not put out what they think the death toll is yet. So those strikes, of course, came in response to the January 28th drone attack in Jordan that killed 3 U.S. troops. And this attack on the U.S. base in occupied Syria is seen as a response to those airstrikes. There's a few other attacks on U.S. bases in Syria and Iraq since Friday, but this one is the most serious since it actually killed these Kurdish fighters. According to AP, the Islamic Resistance in Iraq has taken credit for this attack, and that is the umbrella group of Iraqi Shia militias that stays kind of intentionally. It's hard to know which militias are actually part of that group or which specific militias are launching these attacks, but that is a group that is taking credit for it. And U.S. officials have warned that they basically said that they're not done bombing Iraq and Syria. So the fact that this attack happened and killed some Kurds, even though the U.S. does not care when Kurds get killed, they're always kind of a pawn for the U.S. in the region. But this I think makes it more likely that the U.S. will launch another round of airstrikes in Iraq and Syria. So retired U.S. Marine Corps General Frank McKenzie, who is a former commander of U.S. Central Command, which oversees U.S. military operations in the Middle East. He described Israel's success in Gaza as very limited, noting that Israel has failed to dismantle the Palestinian group's military and political leadership. And he made these comments on Sunday while appearing on Face the Nation, the CBS News channel. So he was asked about the level of Israel's success, and McKenzie said, quote, "It's very limited so far. I think they set themselves a goal of removing the political echelon and the military leadership echelon of Hamas. When they went in, they have not been successful to date at doing either," end quote. So basically saying they've done nothing to dismantle Hamas's military or political leadership inside Gaza. And his comments come as Hamas is reestablishing itself in northern Gaza, where Israel claimed it had eliminated the Palestinian group's military structure. Israel is also struggling to destroy the tunnels underneath Gaza, which are much bigger than they initially thought. And I have the map from South Front here. They've been putting out daily maps on the military situation in Gaza. And you can see that up in Gaza City, where Israel claimed victory, it's mostly controlled by Hamas again. And I know that there's still... It seems like fighting has almost restarted in the north there between Hamas and the Israeli forces. And fighting between them is happening in central Gaza and as well as in southern Gaza near Khan Yunis. And Israel's still ramping up strikes on Rafah, which is where I saw something today that over 1 million Palestinians in Rafah are like just living on the streets in tents. I mean, it's insane. And that's what Israel has its eye on next, to launch a big ground operation and bombing campaign. So the Pentagon has awarded Raytheon, which is the former employer of Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. Always worth pointing that out, that the Pentagon, the Defense Department, is led by someone who literally worked on the board of Raytheon before he took over at the Pentagon. So that's who has awarded the contract to Raytheon. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. So they got this contract, $68 million to supply Taiwan with air-to-surface glide bombs. The contract is for 50 AGM-154 joint standoff weapons, and these are air-to-surface missiles, so they can be fired by Taiwan's fleet of F-16s, U.S.-made F-16 fighter jets that they have. And these bombs have a range of up to 68 miles. And this is part of an arms deal that was initially approved by the Trump administration in 2017. So this kind of shows how long it can take. Deal approved in 2017. Contract is being sorted out now, and it's not expected to be delivered until 2028. So China is opposed to any U.S. military support for Taiwan. That includes weapon sales. They might seem like a normal thing because the U.S. has been selling weapons to Taiwan since 1979 when they cut off diplomatic relations. They kept selling them weapons. But China, when the U.S. and China opened up relations, there was all this, it's very intentionally vague, all of the agreements that they worked out and the communiques and the assurances. And one of the communiques was in 1982. And it basically says that the U.S. will reduce arms sales to Taiwan with eventually stop is basically what it says. But there's like caveats in there. And then when that communique was issued, Reagan at the time basically told Congress, this is based on our interpretation when we will decide to stop selling the weapons. So not only has the U.S. So now looking at it from China's view, of course, from the U.S. view is if China's putting all this pressure on Taiwan, so we have to keep selling them weapons. And of course, a reason why China's been putting the pressure on is because of all this new U.S. support. But from China's view, the U.S. did agree to stop selling weapons. So that's what they always say, in their statements. And not only has the U.S. not stopped selling them weapons, they've increased weapon sales, and now they're giving them military aid, which started last year. So China's not happy about that. And the tensions will continue to grow.
You run your mouth and I run my business, brother. You tell everybody I'm busted. You talk so much you got me disgusted. But you run your mouth and I run my business, brother.
It was from Mayorkas' actual website, because I was just digging in a little bit. This is from the Homeland Security, and I want to read this one part. During Secretary Mayorkas' trip, the United States and Panama signed a bilateral agreement on migration and protection detailing our collaborative commitments to improve migration management, extend stabilization efforts, and increase access to legal pathways and protect those in the region. Why are we going down to Panama to try and protect people who are illegally making their way up to the U.S.? Why is that part of the initiative? There's going to have to be consequences to trying to come here that prevent people from doing it. If you're making it easier and safer, aren't you going to incentivize more of it? This is from Mayorkas' statement. I didn't even go that far into Google. I was just like, is there any other record of the U.S. government trying to work on expanding access into our country, even in South America? And this is from him. Expand stabilization efforts and increase access to legal pathways and protection for those in the region. The arrangement on migration protection adds the expanding regional migration management framework that the United States is developing with counterparts across America. Doesn't that sound like they're trying to make it easier even before you get to the United States? And you got to love that, the word management, regional migration management framework. This was from PBS NewsHour. Watch Mayorkas announce plans to open migration centers in other countries in bid to slow surge. Does that sound like it's going to slow the surge? It sounds to me like you're expanding access. And then on that, in my China invasion, I want to make it clear. I don't think, because if someone else said, hey, China's secretly trying to invade our country, they're putting up a cellular infrastructure that they can collect all of our data. They're sending over China balloons. They manufacture a virus to slow our economy. They're turning all of our kids gay on TikTok. They're making this app where they teach us values that we would never teach ourselves. And they're also seemingly trying to get as many people into this country as possible so that the thing can just fold under its own weight. I would go, well, you better have some solid proof on this. And what are you calling for? Are you calling for war? Are you calling for us not to trade with them anymore? Oh, and also the fentanyl thing. You also got the fentanyl part. But I guess what I will speak to is our intelligence community working together with them? Because even look at the COVID storyline. Fauci, he was working with the lab where that happened. And in this case, is Mayorkas working directly with people in the Chinese government or with NGOs, I guess, with money coming in from them to try and expand our access? So before I would jump to, hey, China's the enemy, and look at them trying to secretly invade our country and destroy our country by rotting our kids' brains with TikTok, sending fentanyl up here, trying to get more people across the border, putting all these kids into schools to steal all of our intelligence, I would first point to, well, to what extent is our intelligence agency involved with said decisions? Into the theater of war, because you don't understand. We're about to find out behind closed scenes. These world leaders call each other up and they go, listen, I'm sitting on a few too many bombs here. You got a spot that I can bomb? I need to go bomb something. Our bomb manufacturers are telling me they're all backed up. They don't have any more storage space for new bombs. They can't process new bomb orders. We got quotas to fill here. We've got profits to make for these bomb companies. And so they call each other up and they go, hey, you got a spot that we can bomb? And they coordinate bombing each other so that they can all pretend like they're at war and make profits. And you think this sounds crazy. You're like, hold on a second. I thought you said that the China invasion conspiratorial talk was coming later in the show. And now you're telling me that world leaders will actually coordinate with each other, how they can pretend like they're fighting so that they can continue to go, hey, it's a good thing I'm here protecting you from here. Here it is. Listen to it straight from Donald Trump.
Iran called me, called for me, and they let us know, and we had 16 missiles went off. I believe it was 16.
Are you guys pranking me in the chat now and just pretending like there's no sound? Because I will say, I would respect that.
On a fort that we had where they hit back. Do you remember when they sent 18 missiles or 16 missiles? 5 failed. They let us know, don't move. We're going to have to hit you back. Psychologically, we have to do that because we hit them on something. You remember. They sent 16 or 18 missiles, and we knew they weren't going to hit inside the fort. And the media was going, and now I reveal it, the media was going wild because they say it's strange. They're very accurate missiles. How come they all missed? Nobody was killed, if you remember. Yes, with all of those missiles, nobody was killed. Now, they had to do it because they have people and they have to show strength. So they aimed the missiles, but they said, please don't attack us. We're not going to hit you. That was respect.
Isn't that a shocking admission of how foreign affairs actually work? And if you guys still didn't hear it, let me know because I will just restart the stream. But isn't that a shocking? We're in control over here. We've been put in power by our citizens, or we're dictators over them, and we have to look like we're strong. So you know what we'll do? We will purposely call ahead of time, let you know, hey, we're bombing. Can you give us an area that we can bomb so we can pretend like we struck back? What a lesson. And if you want an even better lesson about the economy, here's Jerome Powell on 60 Minutes.
It's low and predictable, and people don't have to think about it in their daily lives. That's where we were for 20 years. We want to get back to that.
That was the moment I was looking for. Low and predictable so that people don't have to think about it. We want to be able to steal from people, and we know that there's a level that if it gets too high, people start realizing, oh, you're stealing from me. And so what we need to do is keep it down to 2% because we've quantified that you can rate people at 2%. They're okay with that. If you just steal 2% every single year from what they've saved, they're okay with that. People look the other way on 2%. Sure, it's 2% on top of the taxes and everything else, but 2%, that doesn't really even catch people's eyes. If every single year you're showing up to the supermarket and things are 2% more expensive, that's a slow and steady theft, and people are okay with it. The problem is if it shoots up in the way that it did and everyone goes, wait a second, is there a consequence to all this spending? So we can't have that. We can't have people being educated about the fact that we're lying to them and we're stealing from them very secretly through this process called inflation. And so what we'd like to do is bring it back to that steady 2% level, because at the 2% level, people will let us get away with it.
One interview that was done a long time ago that's been quoted many times. We've used it before, and I'm going to do that before we get into this, where the good news is coming. And that has to do with what Goring said. And that was in 1945, the Nuremberg trials. There was a German psychologist that did an interview with him. And it became a historic interview because Goring was rather blunt. Sounded like he was telling the truth, But it's astounding because there's what he was saying, if there's any infraction, but he was speaking the truth in many ways about trying to explain to the suckers who go to war. And I'm going to read that quote. It's a little bit longer, and people probably heard it, but I keep referring to it because to me it was so significant, all the tragedy of World War II. So this goes, and it's he was asked by the psychologist about how does this happen? How do the people go along with that? Now this is what he said. Why, of course the people don't want war. Goring shrugged. Why would some poor slob on a farm want to risk his life in a war when the best that he can get out of it is to come back to his farm in one piece? Naturally, the common people don't want war, neither in Russia, nor England, nor in America, nor for that matter in Germany. That is understood. But after all, it is the leaders of the country who determine the policy. And it's always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it is a democracy or a fascist dictatorship or a parliament or a communist dictatorship. Those are pretty much truthful, and makes it, you understand why it's so difficult, because eventually the people do turn against the war. I think of the 60s, what we went through there, and 68,000 Americans died. They should have been against the war when the Congress gave the authority to them. But eventually the people do have a responsibility. And we so often, Daniel, I know we've emphasized it on this program, sooner, wake up. And there is a precise philosophy that would prevent this from happening. It would engage the Constitution as well as the principle of non-intervention overseas. But it seems to be so clear to us, but we have to keep saying about it. And yet today, we're still looking for people who want to expand the war, but there's starting to be some resistance to this, and there's some pointing out of some of the waste that goes on. You'd think the people would wake up from that, but they don't see the connection between the inflation tax and what we're doing here.
This will tell you in one sentence a good reason why they want to promote war. These are the military industrial complex's stocks. The price change, you have a 640.7% increase from Northrop Grumman, 612% increase from Lockheed, and so on and so on. So there's huge profits for war. But how, as Goering very well pointed out, how do you do it? How do you convince them? Well, the one thing that they do, Dr. Paul, is they convince them that it's a humanitarian thing, if you remember. The Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter, she faked the hearing. Oh, they're pulling babies from incubators. Completely fake. Gaddafi is running mobile rape labs around the country. You got to take him out. So it's humanitarian. They claim that Putin was doing the same thing, mobile rape labs. Remember the Hillary and a few others, their excuse for why we were in Afghanistan. Well, we're in there to help the girls go to school, blowing up the country. So humanitarian is one, but the other one is fear. They use fear as well. And ironically, I think it was 11 years ago yesterday, you'll remember this, Dr. Paul, I'll never forget this day, 11 years ago yesterday that Colin Powell sat down before the UN with his little test tube and said, Saddam has mobile weapons labs. These will be used in the United States and kill us all. One of the greatest acts of deception in history, I think. And the other thing that they use, just a couple more, is that they use, we got to go to war overseas so we don't have to go to war at home. That's an old one. It works all the time, it seems to. And here we have a video clip of Chuck Schumer saying that just yesterday. We've got to send the $60 billion, another $60 billion to Ukraine. Otherwise, Americans are going to be over there fighting and dying. Lindsey Graham, on the next one, he's saying, I like the path we're on. With U.S. weapons and money, where Ukraine is fighting Russia to the last Ukrainian. So they love this. They use fear, Dr. Paul. They love to use fear and the idea that war is somehow humanitarian.
You know, I want to go back to Colin Powell because there was some resistance for him to do that. His staff, I think, tried to back him off, and he was not a super enthusiast in going down there and do that. But in a way, you know, he had to pay a price.
He did.
You know, he lost all credibility. So that, to me, tells me that the truth does exist. Eventually, they recognize it, but there's no reason why there were people more than you and I talking against that war. We had allies in the Congress. We had Democrats talking about it, and there were anti-war people there, but it's sort of the propaganda machine that is so powerful, and then the people are persuaded. So hopefully we get an audience to the point where we can help stop these wars before they get started. Stopping them anytime is important, and right now I think the people are starting to get maybe a little tired of what we're doing. They certainly ought to be tired of all the money we're spent. They certainly ought to be tired of the invasion in our own country to change policy.
Well, this is kind of related. So what happens when you go to war? Well, a lot of money gets spent and a lot of money gets wasted. This is from Real Clear Wire via Zero Hedge. Waste of the day. Over $1 billion in weapons is missing in Ukraine. It seems like every day, Dr. Paul, we find a new evidence of corruption in Ukraine, yet they have the gall to demand we send more. The DoD has failed to properly track $1 billion worth of weapons provided to Ukraine, according to an internal audit released on January 6th by the DoD Inspector General. Go to the next clip because it's bad. The audit found that $1 billion out of the $1.7 billion, or 59% of the enhanced end-use monitoring design weapons provided to Ukraine are delinquent, meaning they can't be accounted for. But that's the good news, because that 59% delinquency rate is an improvement over the 86% delinquency rate just in December of 22. So they're maybe slightly less corrupt.
I just thought about another reason why the gold standard would work. It'd be harder to hide the money.
Yeah.
If they had to exchange it with gold money, they couldn't hide half of it and steal it. It'd be more. But there'd be always a way that they can do it, because it's the contest between good and evil, and the people who believe that lying is proper in society, and especially if you belong to the government. There's two sets of rules about lying. You know, we're supposed to obey all the laws that they write for us, but the same thing we should have done, like Bastia said, those laws, if they say you shouldn't steal, the government shouldn't steal, and they shouldn't be counterfeiters.